What if I just did the whole video like this? I'm not going to do that, that sounds terrible. Most passionate music fans and audiophiles have known this for a while now, but for the past few years, there has been a resurgence of vinyl. Bringing along with it, there's been a new wave of turntables, headphones, audiophile equipment such as tube amplifiers, and even some instruments for people that are really getting into music through the vinyl format. Maybe it's quarantine and all the time that's being spent at home, but what was first an audiophile / music snob revival of the format, it seems to have hit the mainstream. Over the past few months, I've noticed more and more of my friends owning turntables. That by itself doesn't really tell you much, but the fact that I'm seeing more Crosley turntables in my feed tells me otherwise. Don't worry, I'm not here to gatekeep or badmouth your turntable. In fact, I think it's really cool that people are starting to dive into more music, and vinyl presents a more deliberate way for you to be selective with your music choices. Although I personally wouldn't get one of the briefcase turntables. Anyways, I'm not just making all of this up. 2019 actually saw vinyl surpass CDs in sales, with consistent year-over-year growth over the last 5 or so years, which then got me thinking about the differences between streaming your music and using a vinyl record, why the format matters, and some general things to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and explore that topic today. On paper, it would seem that streaming is a no-brainer choice for listening to your music. It's super convenient, you have access to millions of songs, you can spin up a playlist at the drop of a hat, and even share those playlists with your friends and family, all for a flat price. There's also no shortage for your choice of streaming platform. You have Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Play, YouTube Music, Pandora, even Tidal. While the sound quality argument tends to rear its big ugly head anytime you talk about streaming services, the fact of the matter is, audio quality through streaming hasn't really been a problem for the past, 10 years. The human ear can't even tell the difference from the audio quality of CD sample rates, of which streaming services have already been delivering for a long time. And really the only time that bitrate matters is when you're doing audio production at a high fidelity level, but even then you're doing some really minor tinkering and the human ear again can't really tell the difference. At least certainly not without some really expensive audio equipment, and even then the marginal differences that you get from what you can hear with that equipment isn't really worth the price from almost every angle. Listen, as an audiophile myself, this is just the truth. Although we really shouldn't be mad, that kind of just means that we're in a golden age of music and music quality. Now all of that isn't to say that there isn't some benefit to using better quality headphones and speakers when you're listening to music, but that's a whole different conversation. Okay, so all the audio snob arguments aside, I can't really overstate the access to music that streaming services provide. Right now, you can pull up your app and find a song that you've never heard before in an instant. To me, that's one of the coolest things. New music discovery is almost too easy. And access to the listener or the consumer means that the field has been leveled to some degree, as smaller artists have access to all these people that they might not have had in the past. That's kind of the whole beauty of the internet in the first place, isn't it? Well, as with anything on the internet, and really any service or product, I don't want to gloss over some of the very valid concerns and criticisms that have risen up over the past few years in regards to streaming services. In particular, how much revenue reaches the actual artists themselves. For example, a direct album sale is significantly more valuable to an artist than a stream of an album. Like, we're talking hundreds of times more valuable. The RIAA translates 1,500 streams to one album of 10 tracks. One album sale, I mean. 1,500 streams, one album sale. Seriously, think about this for a second. That's 150 streams per song on a 10-track album. That means for a 10-track, 30-minute album, you would have to play that non-stop for a little over 3 days in a row in order for it to count as a single album sale. Otherwise, you'd have to play the album once per day for 150 days in a row. I don't know about you, but I don't know if I've ever even hit those types of numbers back when I still bought CDs. Now, that's something to keep in mind. I'm not really trying to shame anyone for using streaming services. I use them, and we've certainly come a long way from the early days of the 2000s where piracy was a huge deal and that money wasn't even reaching the artists at all. I'm also not saying that there isn't a path of improvement for supporting artists through streaming services, but that's a whole thing to unpack that I can't really do in a single YouTube video. Now, the vinyl format. As I was thinking through this video, I was wondering to myself, why not CDs? Why is it vinyl the format that's making the resurgence? I had my own reasons for why I thought that this was the case, but I really needed to validate some of that, so I went ahead and reached out to some friends that I know that own records and vinyl, and I looked to find out what made this format so appealing. There was a wide range of reasons for why people were into vinyl. Some like to support their favorite artists a little bit more directly, others like the whole ceremony of getting up and using the record itself, others like the thriftiness of going to a record store and picking out a new record, and even some nostalgia as some people discovered old record collections from family members that bring back some good memories. All very cool reasons by themselves that I think justifies the reason for the resurgence of vinyl to some degree. However, on top of all the different reasons coming from multiple people, there was an underlying common theme across most of them. I'll quote directly from one of my friends here. "What's up, Alex? Keep posting those bread pics. It's impossible to listen to records passively. It is the antithesis of the radio where it's difficult to listen actively, which is also a plus. Our perfectly curated Spotify listening is like a paradox of choice hell, where everything can't be perfect due to constant curation and nothing can be a surprise at the same time." Now, there's quite a bit to unpack here, but he wasn't the only one to mention the experience of listening to music via vinyl. Almost everyone brought up the fact that you have to be much more deliberate in your music choices when you're listening to a record, and therefore having a much more active listening experience. It's interesting again because on paper you have to put in the record, listen to 3 songs, stop the player, flip it over, listen to 3 more songs, and swap out discs if there's multiple LPs. So it seems like it's more of a tedious process, and maybe it is, but it's actually the ceremony of that experience that makes it more appealing. You can't just mindlessly browse an infinite library of content and then just let the music continue on in the background without you noticing. That becomes significantly more highlighted when you're listening to an album in its entirety, where for the most part an overarching story is being told here by an artist. On top of that, the little breaks in between let your mind kind of marinate on the songs that you just listened to, thus creating a little bit more appreciation for the music itself. There's a level of appreciation that you uncover for the art that I think is very interesting. It'd be super weird to go through the whole process of putting on a record just for a single song. So by default, you kind of have to open yourself up a little bit to the listening experience of an album. You can't just press the skip button on yet another digital interface on the screen. And I think that's the surprise element that Alex was talking about. I do think that this causes you to appreciate albums a little bit more. Personally, all these reasons resonate. And while I have considered myself a passionate music listener for a very long time, I do find that vinyl has amplified that experience even more. While arguably the sound isn't better from a technical standpoint, the warmth and texture that you get from the needle on the vinyl creates what I and most of the people I spoke to believe to be a more pleasurable listening experience. It really is just a combination of all of these things. The other thing that really struck a chord with me is the whole process of selecting a record for your collection. A limitation of owning physical media is that space is finite. You don't have an unlimited amount of space to collect records. So while that means that streaming services won't be going away anytime soon, I don't think that's actually a bad thing for vinyl. Because of this limitation, I think that you're forced to make more conscious decisions of the records that you're purchasing. Your collection then becomes your own, and I even see it as a reflection of who you are, some of your tastes, and what you like in music. It's no longer just another profile on an app. I think it's a really good conversation starter, and each record that you own or purchase becomes its own story to tell. Those are simply experiences and things that you can't get from a streaming service. I love music, and I'm really glad that streaming services provide us access to so many great artists. But I'm also really happy to see the revival of vinyl, even as a newer owner myself. Quickly spinning up a playlist for a party that needs a little bit of a jolt is a benefit that we can't take for granted, but kind of like reading a book, the slower, more deliberate pace of listening to a record on vinyl is a quite welcome change in this age of instant gratification. And I'm just happy that people are finding or rediscovering a more profound respect for music and that art. Despite their flaws, both of these formats have their place today. So that's my theory on why I think vinyl is making a resurgence, why it matters, and some differences between streaming services and why they both fit in the world that we live in right now. Let me know what some of your favorite records that you've purchased recently, or if you're interested in getting into it soon and maybe you need some recommendations. I'd be more than happy to continue this conversation. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all next time.